Throughout the 1950s, American families ate 30 breakfast dishes that cost almost nothing and took less than 5 minutes to make. These weren't gourmet restaurant meals requiring fancy ingredients. They were pure survival breakfasts: bread, butter, eggs, and whatever else the pantry. By 1990, every single one had vanished from morning tables, replaced by drive-through breakfast sandwiches and microwaved frozen meals nobody's grandmother would recognize. These are the 30 forgotten 5-min breakfasts from the 1950s every senior should try. Butter and jam toast appeared on breakfast tables every morning because toasting bread and spreading preserves required zero skill and maybe 2 minutes of effort. White bread got toasted until golden, then slathered with real butter, while still hot enough to melt it into every air pocket. Strawberry jam, usually homemade from summer berries preserved in mason jars, got spread thick over the butter. No measuring, no portion control, just generous spoonfuls of fruit, preserved in sugar that tasted like actual strawberries instead of corn syrup and red dye. The combination created layers of flavor that modern toast can't replicate. Store-bought jam tastes nothing like fruit cooked with sugar in grandmother's kitchen. Each slice cost maybe 3 cents in 1965. That 3 cents filled empty stomachs before school buses arrived at 7 in the morning. By 1985, Pop-Tarts replaced real toast. Toaster pastries required zero spreading effort. Nobody made jam anymore because buying it felt easier. Convenience won over flavor when time became more valuable than taste. Cornflakes arrived in American kitchens during the 1950s as the modern miracle that saved exhausted mothers from cooking hot breakfast every single morning. One box cost 35 cents. That box lasted a week if children didn't pour half-cup servings into mixing bowls instead of cereal bowls like they were supposed to. The flakes stayed crispy for maybe 90 seconds after milk hit them. This created a race against soggy mush that children either won or lost, depending on eating speed. Fast eaters got crunchy cereal. Slow eaters got paste. Sugar got sprinkled on top because plain cornflakes tasted like cardboard, without sweetness added. Some families bought puffed wheat instead because it cost less per ounce. The texture was different, but the concept stayed identical. Pour, add milk, eat fast. By 1990, 50 different cereal options existed in grocery store aisles. Nobody remembered when one box feeding 7 people felt like luxury instead of deprivation. Fried egg on bread happened when there was no time for anything complicated, but plain bread felt too boring to eat without complaint from hungry children. One egg got cracked into a hot skillet with butter. The butter sizzled. The egg cooked in maybe 2 minutes if the heat stayed medium-high. Meanwhile, bread got buttered on both sides. No toasting required, just soft white bread with butter spread cold. The fried egg, yolk still runny if done right, got lifted with a spatula and placed directly on the buttered bread. Salt and pepper shaken on top. Sometimes hot sauce if the cook felt fancy. The whole thing got eaten like a sandwich. Yolk dripped down fingers. That was part of the experience. Each breakfast cost about 8 cents in 1960. One egg at 5 cents. Bread at 2 cents. Butter at 1 cent. By 1980, Egg McMuffins cost $1.25. Nobody fried eggs at home anymore when McDonald's felt easier.
Many of you have been asking where to find these recipes. We've gathered hundreds of them from the Depression era through the 1970s in our cookbook, Grandma's Kitchen. Complete instructions, pro tips in 10 chapters. Link is in the description below. Now, let's get back to the video.
Cottage cheese with canned peaches became the go-to breakfast for women trying to lose weight in the 1960s, when cottage cheese diets swept America like a health food revolution. One container of cottage cheese cost 40 cents. One can of peaches cost 30 cents. Together they made breakfast for 3 people if portions stayed modest. The combination sounds strange now, but made perfect sense then. The creamy, tangy cottage cheese balanced the sweet, syrupy peaches. Protein from dairy, fruit for vitamins, low calories compared to bacon and eggs. Doctors recommended it. Magazine articles praised it. Diners served it as the diet plate special, alongside Melba toast and black coffee. Some families ate it because it was healthy. Others ate it because it was fast. No cooking required. Just open containers and scoop. By 1985, yogurt replaced cottage cheese as the trendy health breakfast. Cottage cheese became something only grandmothers ate. The younger generation considered it old-fashioned and weird. Sugar sandwiches fed poor children throughout the Depression and lingered into the 1950s in families that remembered harder times and couldn't shake frugal habits even when money improved. 2 slices of white bread. Butter spread on one side, white sugar sprinkled heavily over the butter, then folded in half and eaten like a taco. That was it. No cooking, no heating, just assembly. The butter made the sugar stick instead of falling off in granular waterfalls. Each sandwich cost maybe 2 cents total. Bread at 1 cent per slice. Butter barely measurable. Sugar practically free. Children loved them because sugar tasted good, and childhood palates preferred sweet over savory every single time. Adults felt guilty serving them because it felt like feeding kids candy for breakfast. But when budgets were tight and time was shorter, sugar sandwiches happened. By 1970, they became embarrassing to admit. Nobody wanted to confess their children ate sugar between bread slices. 5 forgotten breakfasts down, 25 more waiting. Every single one took less than 5 minutes. Every one cost less than 50 cents. These weren't lazy shortcuts. They were survival strategies when mornings started at 5 and nobody had time to cook elaborate meals before work or school started. Coffee soup sounds disgusting to modern ears, but appeared on breakfast tables throughout Appalachia and rural Pennsylvania Dutch communities, where wasting nothing was religion and leftover bread never got thrown away. Stale bread got torn into chunks. Hot coffee got poured into a bowl. Sugar and cream added until it tasted like dessert instead of bitter bean water. Then bread chunks went in to soak. The result was warm, sweet, caffeinated mush that filled stomachs and provided energy from sugar, carbs, and caffeine all at once. Children ate it. Adults ate it. Nobody questioned it because this was just what breakfast looked like when flour cost less than anything else and coffee was always brewing. Each bowl cost maybe 5 cents. Leftover bread was free. Coffee cost 2 cents per cup. Sugar and cream added 3 cents. By 1975, coffee soup vanished when throwaway culture replaced frugality. Stale bread went into trash cans instead of soup bowls. Toast and honey became the breakfast of choice for families who kept beehives or lived near farmers who sold honey in mason jars for $1 a quart. White bread got toasted until crispy. Butter spread thick while the toast was still hot enough to melt it. Then honey got drizzled on top in golden ribbons that pooled in the butter and soaked into the bread. The combination tasted like liquid sunshine, sweet but not artificial, rich but not heavy. Each slice cost about 4 cents in 1960. Bread at 1 cent, butter at 1 cent, honey at 2 cents per tablespoon. Some families used clover honey, others used wildflower. The flavor changed with seasons depending on what flowers the bees visited. By 1985, honey became expensive health food instead of cheap sweetener. Corn syrup replaced it in most kitchens. Toast and honey became something people ordered at fancy brunch restaurants instead of making at home. Spam and eggs happened every Saturday morning in households where fathers worked construction or factory jobs that demanded protein-heavy breakfasts to fuel physical labor through lunch. One can of Spam cost 49 cents and fed a family of 4 if sliced thin. Eggs cost 30 cents a dozen. Together they created breakfast that stuck to ribs and prevented mid-morning hunger that made workers weak. The Spam got sliced into quarter-inch planks and fried in its own grease until edges crisped and turned slightly brown. Then eggs got scrambled in the same pan where Spam grease pooled. The eggs absorbed the salty meat flavor. Everything got served together with white bread for sopping up yolk. By 1990, Spam became a punchline instead of practical protein. People mocked it as mystery meat for people too poor to afford real bacon. The younger generation refused to eat it. Spam and eggs died when blue-collar breakfast culture shifted to drive-through convenience. Pobs came from British working-class kitchens, where the name literally meant pieces of bread, and the recipe couldn't have been simpler if it tried. Stale bread got torn into chunks. Milk got heated on the stove until steaming but not boiling. Sugar got stirred into the hot milk until dissolved. Then bread chunks went in to soak until they turned soft and mushy, like savory rice pudding but made from bread instead. Some families added cinnamon, others added butter. Most just ate it plain, because adding anything cost extra money. Each bowl cost about 6 cents in 1955, milk at 4 cents per cup, bread at 1 cent, sugar at 1 cent. British immigrants brought Pobs to America and served it to their children until the habit died with the generation that remembered poverty. By 1970, nobody under 30 had heard of Pobs. The name sounded too strange. The concept felt too Depression-era to admit. Molasses toast fueled Southern breakfast tables when white sugar cost too much, but molasses stayed cheap because blackstrap molasses was basically a waste product from sugar refining that got sold for pennies per jar. White bread got toasted until golden. Butter spread on while hot. Then molasses got drizzled on top in thick, dark ribbons that looked almost black against the white bread. The flavor was intense, bitter-sweet, mineral-rich. Not everyone liked it, but everyone ate it because molasses provided iron and calories that plain toast couldn't deliver. Each slice cost about 3 cents. Bread at 1 cent, butter at 1 cent, molasses at 1 cent per tablespoon. Some families preferred sorghum molasses. Others used blackstrap. The darkness of the molasses indicated how many minerals it contained. By 1980, molasses became a baking ingredient instead of a breakfast staple. Nobody ate it on toast anymore, except elderly people who remembered when nothing else was available. Instant grits revolutionized Southern breakfast routines in 1968, when Quaker released the 5-minute version that didn't require 30 minutes of constant stirring, like traditional stone-ground grits demanded from cooks who had better things to do. The box cost 29 cents. Each box contained enough grits for 12 servings if portions stayed reasonable. Water went into a pot and boiled. Salt got added. Then grits powder got poured in slowly while stirring to prevent lumps from forming and ruining the texture. 5 minutes of simmering created smooth, creamy grits that Southern grandmothers grudgingly admitted tasted almost as good as the real thing. Almost. Not quite. But close enough when time mattered more than perfection. Butter got stirred in at the end. A tablespoon per serving. The butter melted into golden pools that mixed with the white grits to create pale yellow breakfast that stuck to ribs until lunch. Some families added cheese, others added sugar. Purists ate them plain with just butter and salt because that's how grits were meant to be eaten, according to tradition that went back generations. Each serving cost about 8 cents total. Grits at 3 cents, butter at 3 cents, salt negligible. Milk added 2 cents if used instead of water. By 1990, instant grits became the only kind most people knew. Nobody under 40 had eaten real stone-ground grits that took an hour to cook properly. The younger generation didn't know what they were missing. Instant won. Tradition lost. Speed replaced quality when mornings became too rushed for slow cooking. Leftover rice from last night's dinner got transformed into breakfast the next morning because throwing away perfectly good food was a sin in households that remembered the Depression and couldn't shake the habit of using everything twice. The rice sat in the refrigerator overnight, getting cold and slightly hard. That hardness was actually perfect for frying because soft, fresh rice turned to mush in a hot skillet. Bacon fat from yesterday's breakfast got saved in a coffee can on the stove. A tablespoon went into a cast-iron skillet over medium-high heat. The cold rice went in next. It sizzled immediately. A spatula broke up the clumps. The rice got stirred constantly to prevent burning while it crisped on the edges. Then one egg got cracked directly into the rice, scrambled right there in the pan. The egg coated the rice grains and added protein without requiring separate cooking. Salt and pepper shaken on top. Sometimes soy sauce if the family had it. Sometimes just salt. The whole process took maybe 4 minutes from start to plate. Each serving cost about 7 cents. Leftover rice was free since it was already purchased. Bacon fat was free since it was saved grease. One egg cost 5 cents. Seasoning cost 2 cents. By 1985, leftover rice went into trash cans instead of breakfast skillets. People stopped saving bacon grease. The practice felt old-fashioned and unsanitary, even though grandmothers had done it for decades without anyone getting sick. Fried rice breakfast died when convenience replaced resourcefulness, and throwaway culture made using leftovers feel embarrassing instead of smart. Hot milk gruel appeared in sick rooms and breakfast tables throughout the 1950s when comfort food needed to be gentle on stomachs, but still provide enough nutrition to get through morning without collapsing. Milk went into a saucepan over medium heat, not boiling, just hot enough to steam. Cornmeal got whisked in slowly, maybe 3 tablespoons per cup of milk. Constant stirring prevented lumps from forming. The mixture thickened as cornmeal absorbed milk and swelled into a porridge texture that was neither liquid nor solid, but somewhere perfectly in between. Sugar got stirred in. A tablespoon per serving. Some families added cinnamon, others added nutmeg. A few added butter at the end for richness. The result tasted like liquid cornbread sweetened and served warm in a bowl with a spoon. Each serving cost about 9 cents. Milk at 6 cents per cup. Cornmeal at 2 cents. Sugar at 1 cent. Spices negligible if used. Mothers served it to sick children because it was easy to digest. Fathers ate it before winter work outside because it provided warmth and calories. Elderly people ate it because chewing wasn't required for soft foods. By 1975, instant cream of wheat replaced milk gruel in most kitchens. The boxed version required less attention and fewer steps. Whisking cornmeal into hot milk while preventing scorching took focus that busy cooks didn't have anymore. Soft white bread spread with butter and sprinkled with cinnamon became the breakfast of choice for children who refused to eat anything else and exhausted mothers who gave up fighting food battles before 7 in the morning. The bread didn't get toasted. That was the whole point. Toasting took time and required watching to prevent burning. Soft bread required nothing but spreading. Room temperature butter went on thick. Then cinnamon got shaken from the spice jar in a generous dusting that covered the entire butter layer. Sugar could be added, but wasn't necessary if the cinnamon was fresh enough to taste sweet on its own. Some children folded it in half like a taco. Others rolled it into logs. Most just ate it flat. The combination delivered comfort without complexity. Soft, buttery, sweet, and slightly spicy all at once. Each slice cost about 3 cents. Bread at 1 cent. Butter at 1 cent. Cinnamon at 1 cent per shake. No cooking, No cleanup, no burning risks, just spreading and eating. By 1980, this breakfast became something parents felt guilty about serving because it felt too simple, like they weren't trying hard enough. Magazine articles preached about balanced breakfasts with protein and fruit and whole grains. Butter and cinnamon on white bread checked none of those boxes. It was pure carbs and fat with zero nutritional value beyond calories. But it got eaten without complaint. It filled stomachs. It prevented pre-lunch hunger. Sometimes that was enough, when mornings were chaos and getting everyone out the door on time mattered more than perfect nutrition. Oatmeal cooked in water instead of milk happened in households where milk was too expensive to use for cooking when it could be saved for drinking, and growing children needed calcium more than flavor in their breakfast. Quick oats came in cardboard cylinders that cost 35 cents and lasted 2 weeks if portions stayed small. Water went into a pot and boiled. Oats got poured in. The ratio was 2 parts water to 1 part oats. Stirring prevented sticking. 5 minutes of simmering created thick porridge that looked gray and unappetizing, but filled stomachs efficiently. Salt got added, maybe a pinch per serving. Sugar if the family could afford it. Brown sugar if they couldn't. Molasses if nothing else existed. The texture was different from milk-based oatmeal. Thinner, less creamy, but it served the same purpose of providing hot breakfast that stuck to ribs and prevented hunger until lunch. Each serving cost about 4 cents. Oats at 3 cents per half cup. Water-free. Salt negligible. Sugar 1 cent if used. Some families added raisins if any existed in the pantry. The dried fruit added sweetness and made plain oatmeal feel less like punishment. By 1985, instant oatmeal packets with flavoring included replaced plain quick oats in most kitchens. The packets cost more, but required less thinking about ratios and stirring and timing. Water-based oatmeal vanished when milk became cheap enough that cooking with it stopped feeling wasteful. The younger generation never knew that oatmeal could be made without milk, because that's all they ever saw. 15. Forgotten breakfasts covered, halfway through 30. Notice the pattern yet? Every recipe used cheap ingredients most families already owned. Everyone took less time than brushing teeth. These weren't fancy brunches. They were fuel. Pure survival eating when convenience and speed mattered more than culinary excellence or balanced nutrition. Saving bacon grease in a coffee can beside the stove was standard practice in every kitchen where nothing went to waste, and flavor mattered more than modern food safety concerns that make people nervous about room temperature animal fat sitting uncovered. Every time bacon got cooked, the grease got poured into the can. The can sat there for weeks, accumulating layers of congealed white fat that solidified when cool. That fat was liquid gold for flavoring everything from vegetables to breakfast toast. Bread got toasted until golden and crispy. Then, while still hot, the toast got rubbed with a spoonful of cold bacon grease. The heat melted the fat instantly. It soaked into the toast, creating rich, savory, smoky flavor that butter alone could never replicate. Salt got sprinkled on top, sometimes pepper, sometimes nothing else because bacon fat provided enough flavor on its own. Each slice cost maybe 2 cents, bread at 1 cent, bacon fat-free since it was saved from previous meals, salt negligible. The toast tasted like bacon without requiring cooking actual bacon that morning. It delivered protein and fat and carbs all together. Working men ate it before factory shifts. Farmers ate it before morning chores. Children ate it without complaint, because bacon flavor made everything better. By 1980, doctors started warning about saturated fat and heart disease. Saltine crackers spread with butter and eaten alongside hot coffee became the breakfast of elderly people who either couldn't chew harder foods anymore or simply preferred the simplicity of crackers over cooking actual breakfast that required effort and attention. A sleeve of saltines cost 12 cents. Butter cost 15 cents per stick. Together they provided enough breakfast for a week, if portions stayed modest. The crackers came out of the sleeve. Butter got spread on each one individually. Not melted, just cold butter spread thick enough to cover the surface. Some people stacked them, others ate them one at a time. All of them dunked the crackers into hot coffee. The coffee softened the crackers enough to make chewing easier. The butter added richness. The salt added flavor. The coffee provided caffeine and warmth. The entire combination cost about 6 cents per breakfast. 4 crackers at 2 cents, butter at 3 cents, coffee at 1 cent. No cooking, no cleanup beyond a butter knife and coffee cup. By 1990, this breakfast became something only very old people ate. The younger generation considered it depressing. Crackers and coffee felt like giving up on life instead of embracing it. But for people in their 80s who grew up during the Depression, crackers and coffee represented normalcy. Canned salmon mixed with scrambled eggs. Canned salmon got mixed into scrambled eggs on Fridays in Catholic households, where eating meat on Fridays was forbidden, but fish was perfectly acceptable according to religious rules that governed breakfast choices. A can of pink salmon cost 49 cents. That can made breakfast for 4 people if stretched with eggs that cost 5 cents each. The salmon got drained. Bones got removed if anyone cared enough to pick them out. Most people didn't bother because the bones were soft enough to eat and provided calcium. The salmon got flaked into chunks with a fork. Then eggs got cracked into a bowl, whisked together, poured into a hot skillet with butter. The salmon chunks went in before the eggs fully set. Everything got stirred together until the eggs cooked through. The result was pink speckled scrambled eggs that tasted like the ocean. Salty, fishy, rich with omega-3 oils that nobody knew about in 1960, but that doctors now praise as essential nutrients. Some families added onions. Others added peppers. Most kept it plain because vegetables cost extra money. Each serving cost about 15 cents, salmon at 12 cents, eggs at 5 cents total, butter at 2 cents. By 1985, canned salmon became something only cats ate. Pet food companies used it in tuna alternative recipes. Humans stopped buying it. The stigma of eating canned fish for breakfast felt too Depression-era to continue. Fresh salmon became available year-round in grocery stores. Expensive but available. Vinegar toast sounds absolutely disgusting to anyone who hasn't tasted it, but was standard breakfast fare in German and Pennsylvania Dutch communities, where vinegar was a pantry staple, used for everything from pickling to flavoring. White bread got toasted until crispy. Then white vinegar got drizzled on top. Not much, maybe a teaspoon per slice, enough to provide tanginess without making the toast soggy. Sugar got sprinkled over the vinegar immediately. The sugar helped neutralize the acid and created a sweet-sour combination that tasted oddly addictive once you got past the initial shock of vinegar on bread. Some families used apple cider vinegar instead of white. The flavor was mellower, less harsh, more complex. Children either loved it or hated it, with no middle ground existing between the two extremes. Each slice cost about 2 cents, bread at 1 cent, vinegar negligible since a teaspoon cost almost nothing, sugar at 1 cent. No butter required, no cooking beyond toasting, just drizzling and sprinkling. By 1975, vinegar toast became something people were embarrassed to admit they ate. It sounded too weird, too poverty-driven, like something only desperate people ate when nothing else existed. The younger generation refused to try it. Parents stopped making it. The recipe died with the immigrants who brought it from Europe, and the children who learned it before American abundance made weird ethnic breakfasts feel unnecessary. Vinegar toast vanished when assimilation replaced tradition, and American breakfast norms erased regional variations that didn't fit the bacon and egg standard everyone recognized. Saltines crushed into warm milk. Crushing saltine crackers into warm milk created a breakfast that looked absolutely revolting, but provided easy-to-digest nutrition for sick people, toddlers with few teeth, and elderly people whose dentures didn't fit properly anymore. Milk got heated in a saucepan until warm but not boiling. Hot milk scalded mouths and tasted wrong. Warm milk was perfect. Saltines got crushed, sometimes with hands, sometimes with a rolling pin if anyone bothered with technique. The crushed crackers went into a bowl. Warm milk got poured over them. The crackers absorbed milk instantly and turned into a mushy porridge texture that required no chewing. Sugar got stirred in, maybe a tablespoon, sometimes honey if it existed, sometimes nothing if the person eating it was too sick to care about sweetness. Each bowl cost about 7 cents, milk at 5 cents per cup, crackers at 2 cents, sugar 1 cent if used. The combination provided carbs from crackers, protein and calcium from milk, enough calories to prevent weakness, gentle enough to stay down when stomachs were upset. By 1980, instant oatmeal and cream of wheat replaced crackers in milk for sick people breakfast. The packaged versions looked more appetizing, tasted better, required the same amount of effort. Milk and crackers mush died when commercial alternatives became cheap enough that homemade versions stopped making financial sense. The last generation to eat it regularly was born before 1950. Everyone younger considers it gross. The thought of soggy crackers in milk makes modern people gag even though their grandparents ate it weekly without complaint. Bread and lard was the ultimate frontier breakfast of the 1950s, carried over from generations of homesteaders who relied on animal fat as their primary cooking and eating resource. A thick slice of homemade or store-bought white bread was spread generously with cold rendered lard, then sprinkled lightly with coarse salt. The lard, saved from pork roasts, bacon frying, or butchering days, was kept in a covered crock or tin on the counter, soft enough to spread but firm enough to hold its shape. This breakfast cost about 30 cents and required no cooking, no cleanup, and no fuss. It provided dense calories and fat for manual labor, whether that meant farm chores, factory shifts, or long school days in unheated rural buildings. Children ate it cold before catching the bus. Men ate it with black coffee before heading to the fields. Women ate it standing at the kitchen sink while planning the rest of the day's meals. The flavor was mild, slightly porky, and deeply savory, especially when the lard came from pasture-raised hogs. Some families added a drizzle of honey or a sprinkle of cinnamon, but most ate it plain. The texture was smooth and rich, coating the roof of the mouth with a silky fat that lasted through morning chores. Grandmothers preferred lard from the butcher shop or from their own hog rendering, stored in ceramic crocks that kept it fresh for months. The breakfast took less than 2 minutes to prepare and could be eaten with one hand while doing chores with the other. It was portable, shelf-stable, and required no refrigeration. In rural communities, bread and lard was considered normal, even respectable, because it utilized every part of the hog and wasted nothing. The salt enhanced the natural pork flavor and provided essential minerals for people who worked outdoors in all weather. Some families kept flavored lard, rendered with herbs, garlic, or black pepper, specifically for spreading on bread. The practice connected directly to European peasant traditions, where bread and fat sustained laborers for centuries. By 1975, bread and lard had vanished from American breakfast tables. The rise of margarine, butter's return to affordability, and the growing association of animal fat with heart disease made lard socially unacceptable. Younger generations rejected it as poor food or depression food, even though it had sustained their grandparents through decades of hard work. Canned peaches on toast was a 1950s shortcut breakfast, that transformed pantry staples into something almost elegant. A slice of white bread was toasted until golden, then topped with 2 or 3 canned peach halves straight from the can, along with a spoonful of the sweet syrup. Some grandmothers added a dollop of cottage cheese on the side or a sprinkle of cinnamon on top, but the basic version was just toast and peaches. The whole meal cost about 45 cents and took less than 3 minutes to assemble. Canned peaches were a Depression-era luxury that carried into the post-war years as a symbol of preparedness and prosperity. Every basement shelf had rows of canned fruit, peaches, pears, applesauce, bought in bulk or preserved at home during summer harvest. This breakfast was popular with children, who loved the sweetness, and with tired mothers, who appreciated the speed. The toast absorbed the syrup, creating a soft, sugary base that contrasted with the firm, slippery texture of the peach slices. It was often served on Saturday mornings or during busy harvest seasons when hot breakfasts weren't practical. The dish also appeared as a light supper or snack, especially for elderly family members or anyone recovering from illness. Grandmothers kept multiple cans of peaches in the pantry specifically for mornings when time was short or when fresh food was scarce. The combination of warm toast and cold fruit created a temperature contrast that made the dish feel more substantial than it was. Some families used the leftover syrup to sweeten oatmeal or pancake batter later in the week, ensuring nothing went to waste. The breakfast could be eaten at the table or wrapped in wax paper and taken to work or school. Canned peaches were processed at peak ripeness, making them sweeter and softer than most fresh fruit available in winter months. The syrup, thick with corn syrup and sugar, provided quick energy for physical work. Some grandmothers warmed the peaches slightly in a saucepan before serving, creating a comforting hot and cold contrast. Others mashed the peaches into the toast, creating a jam-like spread. The dish required no skill, no recipe, and no planning beyond keeping canned goods stocked. It bridged the gap between dessert and breakfast, offering sweetness without guilt because it contained fruit. By 1980, canned peaches on toast had disappeared from breakfast tables. The health food movement criticized canned fruit for added sugar and preservatives, while fresh fruit became more affordable and available year-round. Younger generations preferred yogurt parfaits or smoothie bowls, dismissing canned peaches as old-fashioned or too sweet. Egg white-only fry was a 1950s Depression holdover breakfast, born from the practice of saving egg yolks for baking or selling. Grandmothers who made custards, mayonnaise, or sponge cakes often had leftover egg whites, which they fried quickly in a hot, greased skillet until the edges crisped and the center set firm. The result was a bland, rubbery disc that cost about 15 cents and took less than 3 minutes to cook. Salt and pepper were added, sometimes a dash of paprika or a drizzle of bacon grease for flavor, but the egg white itself contributed almost nothing beyond protein. This breakfast was common in farm households, where eggs were sold by the dozen for income, and every yolk was precious. Children were often served egg white fry while the yolks went into cake batter or were sold to local bakeries. The practice reflected extreme frugality, where even the least desirable part of an egg was considered too valuable to discard. Women who baked commercially from home, selling pies, cakes, and pastries to neighbors or local stores, accumulated egg whites faster than they could use them. Rather than throw them away, they fried them for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. The texture was rubbery and squeaky, lacking the rich, creamy yolk that made fried eggs satisfying. Some families ate egg white fry on bread, creating a makeshift sandwich with mustard or ketchup. Others served it alongside grits or oatmeal to add protein without cost. The dish was especially common during spring and summer, when hens laid prolifically and egg production outpaced household consumption. Grandmothers justified the practice by emphasizing protein and waste reduction, even though the meal was universally disliked. Children complained about the lack of flavor and the strange, bouncy texture, but they ate it anyway because food was not wasted. Some families added chopped onions, bell peppers, or leftover vegetables to the egg whites before frying, creating a primitive version of an egg white omelet. Others whipped the whites slightly before cooking, creating a fluffier, more palatable texture. The practice required no recipe and no skill, just a hot pan and a willingness to eat what was available. By 1985, egg white-only fry had disappeared entirely. The rise of industrialized baking and commercial egg products meant that home bakers no longer accumulated surplus egg whites. Wartime toast was a 1940s ration-era breakfast that lingered in American kitchens through the 1950s and early 1960s. A slice of bread was toasted dry, then rubbed lightly with a cut clove of garlic or a halved tomato, providing flavor without using rationed butter, margarine, or jam. Some versions added a sprinkle of salt or a drizzle of bacon grease saved from previous meals. The toast cost about 20 cents and took less than 2 minutes to prepare. It originated during World War II when butter, sugar, and meat were rationed, and home cooks learned to create flavor from herbs, vegetables, and drippings. Grandmothers who lived through the war never forgot those lessons and continued making wartime toast long after rationing ended, especially on busy mornings or when pantry supplies ran low. The garlic version produced a sharp, pungent aroma that filled the kitchen and clung to clothes for hours. The tomato version created a light pink stain on the bread and a subtle, fresh acidity that complemented black coffee. Children often disliked both versions, preferring sweet spreads, but they ate what was served. The toast was filling enough to sustain morning chores, but light enough to avoid weighing down workers before physical labor. Some families toasted the bread over an open flame or wood stove, creating charred spots that added smokiness. Others used a stovetop toaster or the oven broiler, adjusting heat to prevent burning. The practice of rubbing raw garlic or tomato directly onto hot bread released essential oils and juices, creating a more intense flavor than spreading room-temperature ingredients. Wartime toast appeared in military cookbooks, home economics manuals, and church community cookbooks as an example of creative thrift. It was often served alongside boiled eggs, oatmeal, or leftover vegetables to create a complete meal. The dish required no special equipment, no refrigeration, and no advanced preparation. By 1970, wartime toast had disappeared from American tables. Oat porridge water was a thin, watery version of oatmeal made by boiling rolled oats in excess water, then straining out the oats and drinking the liquid. The resulting beverage was pale, slightly slimy, and faintly sweet, with a texture somewhere between broth and milk. It cost about 25 cents and took less than 5 minutes to prepare. Grandmothers made oat porridge water for infants, elderly family members, or anyone with digestive issues who couldn't tolerate solid food. The strained oats were saved. Tomato sandwich was a 1950s summer breakfast that celebrated the peak of garden season with minimal preparation. A slice of white bread was spread with mayonnaise or butter, topped with thick slices of ripe tomato, then sprinkled with salt and pepper. Some grandmothers added a second slice of bread to make it a proper sandwich, but most ate it open-faced with a fork and knife. The whole meal cost about 40 cents and took less than 3 minutes to assemble. Fresh tomatoes, grown in backyard gardens or bought from roadside stands, were at their peak from July through September, when they were so abundant that families ate them at every meal. The tomatoes' juice soaked into the bread, creating a soft, soggy base that contrasted with the firm, meaty texture of the tomato slices. The salt drew out additional moisture and intensified the tomato's natural sweetness. Some families used homemade mayonnaise, thick and tangy, with raw egg yolks and oil. Others used store-bought Hellmann's or Miracle Whip, which added a commercial sweetness. The breakfast was especially popular in southern states, where tomatoes grew prolifically and morning heat made hot cooking undesirable. Grandmothers ate tomato sandwiches standing at the kitchen counter, often while canning or preserving the rest of the tomato harvest. Children ate them reluctantly, preferring sweet breakfasts to savory ones, but they learned to appreciate the fresh, garden flavor. The dish required no cooking, no planning, and no skill beyond slicing. It appeared in church cookbooks, home economics textbooks, and community recipe collections as an example of seasonal eating. Some families added cucumber slices, lettuce, or bacon when available, but the basic version was just bread, tomato, and condiment. The practice of eating raw tomatoes for breakfast was common in farming communities, where vegetables were more accessible than meat or eggs. By 1985, tomato sandwich had largely moved from breakfast to lunch. The rise of bacon, lettuce, tomato sandwiches, bagels with cream cheese and tomato, and breakfast burritos repositioned tomatoes as a lunch ingredient rather than a morning staple. Younger generations associated tomatoes with salads and sandwiches eaten midday, not with the first meal of the day. The practice of seasonal eating faded as supermarkets provided year-round produce, eliminating the summer glut that made tomato breakfasts necessary. Tomato sandwich represented a time when breakfast followed the garden calendar and fresh produce was eaten immediately. Bruis was a Newfoundland-influenced breakfast that appeared in 1950s coastal American communities, particularly in New England fishing towns. Hard ship's biscuit, or stale bread, was soaked overnight in cold water until softened, then drained and fried in salt pork fat or bacon grease until lightly crisped. Some versions added salt cod, creating fish and Bruis, but the breakfast version was usually just the soaked bread and fat. The whole meal cost about 50 cents and took about 5 minutes of active cooking time, though the overnight soaking required planning. Ship's biscuit, also called hardtack, was a shelf-stable, rock-hard bread originally designed for long sea voyages. It kept indefinitely without spoiling, but was inedible unless soaked or broken down. Fishermen's families kept hardtack on hand for emergencies and for making Bruis when fresh bread was unavailable. The soaking process transformed the concrete-like biscuit into a soft, spongy mass that absorbed the flavors of whatever fat it was fried in. Salt pork fat, rendered from salt-preserved pork, provided intense saltiness and rich porky flavor. The fried Bruis developed crispy edges and a creamy interior, similar to hash browns or fried potatoes. The dish was filling, cheap, and required ingredients that could be stored for months without refrigeration. Grandmothers in fishing communities made Bruis on mornings when the boats came in early, or when the weather was too rough for fresh catches. Children ate it with molasses or corn syrup drizzled on top, cutting the saltiness and adding sweetness. Adults ate it plain with black coffee, appreciating the substantial calories before a day of physical labor. The practice of soaking hard bread dated back centuries, appearing in European peasant cooking and military rations. Bruis was the North Atlantic version, tied directly to fishing culture and maritime traditions. Some families used regular stale bread instead of hardtack, creating a softer, quicker version. Others added onions, potatoes, or scraps of saltfish to stretch the meal further. By 1975, Bruis had disappeared from American breakfast tables. The decline of home fishing, the end of hardtack production for civilian use, and the shift away from salt-preserved meats all contributed to its disappearance. Younger generations had no access to ship's biscuit and no knowledge of how to prepare it. The dish remained popular in Newfoundland and parts of Atlantic Canada, but vanished from American consciousness. Bruis represented a time when breakfast was built around preserved foods and maritime traditions. Bread and syrup soak was a Depression-era breakfast that survived into the 1950s as a quick, sweet meal for children and workers. A slice of white bread was torn into chunks and placed in a bowl, then covered with cheap pancake syrup or corn syrup and eaten with a spoon. The bread absorbed the syrup quickly, becoming soft, sticky, and intensely sweet. The whole meal cost about 30 cents and took less than 2 minutes to prepare. Some families added a splash of milk to thin the syrup and create a cereal-like consistency. Others toasted the bread first to slow absorption and add texture. The dish was popular with children, who loved the candy-like sweetness, and with exhausted mothers, who appreciated the speed and low cost. Grandmothers served bread and syrup soak on mornings when the cupboard was nearly bare, and payday was still days away. The syrup, usually store-brand corn syrup or imitation maple, was thick, glossy, and artificially flavored, providing pure sugar calories without nutritional value. The bread, often homemade or day-old white bread from the bakery discount rack, added bulk and carbohydrates. Together, they created a filling breakfast that silenced hunger for several hours, even if it provided little actual nutrition. Some families used molasses instead of syrup, adding iron and a more complex, slightly bitter flavor. Others used honey when available, though it was usually too expensive for daily use. The practice of soaking bread in sweet liquid dated back centuries, appearing in European bread puddings, British Pobs, and colonial-era sop. Bread and syrup soak was the most stripped-down version, eliminating milk, eggs, spices, and baking. It was eaten cold, requiring no stove, no oven, and no heat. Children ate it, standing at the counter or sitting on the back porch before school. Workers ate it in the truck on the way to the job site. The dish left sticky residue on bowls, spoons, and fingers, but it required only a quick rinse to clean. Some families considered it a treat rather than deprivation, especially when syrup was scarce and reserved for special occasions. By 1975, bread and syrup soak had disappeared from American breakfast routines. The rise of ready-to-eat cereals, toaster pastries, and sweetened breakfast bars provided similar sweetness with more convenience and social acceptability. Nutritionists condemned the dish as empty calories and pure sugar, linking it to tooth decay and hyperactivity in children. Younger generations rejected it as poverty food and refused to serve it to their own children. The cultural shift toward fresh, whole foods and away from processed sugars made syrup-soaked bread seem barbaric. Bread and syrup soak represented a time when sweetness was a luxury, and breakfast was whatever stopped hunger. Buttermilk biscuit crumble was a 1950s Southern breakfast that repurposed leftover biscuits into a fast, filling meal. Cold biscuits from the previous night's dinner were crumbled by hand into a bowl, covered with cold buttermilk, and eaten with a spoon. Some families added a pinch of salt or a drizzle of honey, but most ate it plain. The whole meal cost about 40 cents and took less than 2 minutes to prepare. Buttermilk, thick, tangy, and slightly sour, was a byproduct of butter churning and was nearly free on farms or inexpensive at the store. The biscuits, made from flour, lard, and buttermilk, were dense, crumbly, and slightly savory. Together, they created a porridge-like consistency that was filling and familiar. The dish was especially common in Appalachia, the Deep South, and rural farming communities where biscuits were made fresh every day and leftovers were never wasted. Children ate buttermilk biscuit crumble before school, using it to soak up the richness of the buttermilk and stretch the previous night's baking into another meal. Adults ate it standing in the kitchen before heading to the fields or factory. The cold temperature made it refreshing in summer, while the buttermilk provided probiotics and calcium. Some families warmed the mixture slightly on the stove, creating a hot porridge that resembled grits or cream of wheat. Others added crumbled bacon, sausage, or ham to increase protein and flavor. The practice of soaking stale bread or biscuits in liquid was ancient, appearing in cultures worldwide as a way to revive hard, dried baked goods. Buttermilk biscuit crumble was the American Southern version, deeply tied to agricultural rhythms and home baking traditions. The dish required no recipe, no skill, and no special equipment. It was eaten from whatever bowl was available, with whatever spoon was clean. Grandmothers taught daughters to make it, passing down the knowledge that nothing edible should ever be thrown away. By 1985, buttermilk biscuit crumble had vanished from breakfast tables. The decline of home baking, the rise of refrigerated biscuit dough, and the shift away from buttermilk consumption all contributed to its disappearance. Younger generations found the texture unappealing, mushy, lumpy, and sour, and preferred crispy cereals or fresh pastries. Potato water soup was a 1950s waste-nothing breakfast made from the starchy water left over from boiling potatoes the night before. The cloudy, slightly thick liquid was reheated on the stove, seasoned with salt and pepper, then eaten as a thin soup or used as a base for adding leftover bread, crackers, or vegetables. The whole meal cost about 20 cents and took less than 4 minutes to prepare. In farm households where potatoes were boiled daily for dinner, the cooking water was automatically saved in a covered pot or jar and used the next morning. The water contained dissolved starches, vitamins, and minerals that leached out during cooking, making it more nutritious than plain water. The texture was slippery and slightly gelatinous. Was a 1950s protein-rich breakfast, common in coastal communities and working-class households. A can of sardines, packed in oil, tomato sauce, or mustard, was opened, and the fish were arranged on toasted bread, then eaten with a fork or by hand. The whole meal cost about 55 cents and took less than 3 minutes to prepare. Canned sardines were affordable, shelf-stable, and required no cooking or refrigeration, making them ideal for busy mornings or households without reliable access to fresh fish. The sardines themselves were small, oily, and intensely flavored, with soft, edible bones that provided calcium. Some families mashed the sardines into the toast, creating a spread similar to pâté. Others ate them whole, appreciating the firm texture and rich, briny taste. The oil from the can was often drizzled over the toast or saved for frying eggs later in the week. Grandmothers who grew up near oceans, rivers, or fishing ports developed a taste for sardines and passed it to their children. The breakfast was especially popular in Portuguese, Italian. Between 1950 and 1990, these 30 breakfasts vanished from American tables. They cost pennies, required no skill, and fed families through scarcity and exhaustion. Grandmothers who lived through the Depression and war years never forgot how to make something from nothing: bread soaked in syrup, crackers in milk, toast rubbed with garlic. But their children rejected these meals as symbols of poverty, and their grandchildren never learned to make them. The recipes disappeared along with the belief that breakfast should be fast, cheap, and functional. Today, these dishes exist only in faded community cookbooks and elderly memories.